This is Don Carter. In this video, I present my Iceberg model. The iceberg is one of two models that forms the foundation for my primary approach to therapy. This video will tell you a lot about my specialties and experience as a professional helper. The iceberg represents a human being. The waterline is the dividing line between what's in our conscious awareness and what's in our subconscious. The deeper beneath the water you go, the deeper into our subconscious. Some things are close to the surface and still available to easily draw upon. Other issues might require a little personal archaeology. When I put this word abandonment in here, and I ask people what it means, 95% of the time I hear to be left alone or physically abandoned. Many of us who grew up in a less than nurturing family understand that people can be there, but not really be there emotionally. When we come into the world, as infants, we have a primal need for connection. This brings up a primal fear of abandonment. That's because without a caretaker, we would not survive. So built into the nervous system of every child is a way to express a need for connection. They cry out for help. If that cry goes unanswered, then they turn up the volume and cry out for rescue. A child needs caretakers who can be attentive and responsive. In the ideal situation, a caretaker understands and reliably attends to the needs of the infant. Attentive caretakers need to be tuned in, available and approachable. They need to be all about the child. When the child is wet, it gets changed. When it's hungry, it gets fed. When it's tired, it gets a nap. When it's fussy, it gets soothed and comforted. Almost every time. If this happens consistently, the child is more likely to develop a healthy attachment style, meaning they can form healthy attachments in relationships later on in life. When a caretaker is absent, not reliable, or only inconsistently reliable, abandonment issues occur. Unmet childhood dependency needs set off alarms in the nervous system of the child. They cry for help, then they cry for rescue. Abandonment wounds are also known as attachment wounds. Attachment wounds can lead to dysfunctional attachment styles, and therefore problems in relationships later on. There are two groups of childhood dependency needs. The first group has to do with survival mode. Survival dependency needs include food, shelter, clothing, medical attention, but also safety and protection. A child must feel safe and protected, or those alarms in the nervous system begin to get triggered. In order to feel safe, even when they're not, they have to idealize their caretakers. They see them as 10-foot-tall, bulletproof, godlike creatures. If I'm protected by a godlike creature, nothing can get to me. It is this need to idealize our caretakers that can lead to toxic shame. We'll talk more about that later on in the presentation. The second group of dependency needs includes the emotional dependency needs. This is the emotional nourishment that a child requires, almost as much as food and water. Emotional dependency needs include time, attention, affection, and direction. There are two kinds of direction children need. The first is guidance, and the second is discipline. To a child, time equals love. Whatever mom and dad give their time to is what they love. They don't understand budgets or bills or economics. Dad could be working all the time and have only a little time for the family as his way of showing love. But the children get it that dad loves work more than he does them. To a child, attention equals worth or value. If these godlike creatures attend to me, they must think I'm valuable or worthy of their attention. Attending means much more than just listening to a child. It means knowing who they are, what they think, who their best friend is, what they're doing in school, what's the highlight of their day, what's the low light. It's being actively engaged in their life on their level. This means being involved, looking out for their best interests, being available and approachable. To a child, affection equals approval. Hugs, kisses, pats on the back, words of encouragement, bragging about the kids when they're in earshot. Saying things like, "I'm proud of you," "I love you," "I'm so happy you're in our family," "I'm proud to be your mom or dad." All of these expressions tell a child that they measure up in the eyes of these godlike creatures. Children hunger and thirst for these expressions of affection, for attention, for time, not necessarily quantity of time as much as quality of time, where all the other needs are being met as well. If a child doesn't get enough attention, they become attention-seeking. If they don't get enough affection, they become approval-seeking. Not because they want these things, but because they need these things. And yes, the rule of moderation applies here too. Although it's difficult, parents can overdo by giving too much time, attention, or affection. This can do harm just as well as not giving any at all. That's because children need direction and limits as well. Kids are born not knowing how to do much of anything. Available and approachable parents will give them the time, attention, and affection necessary to teach their kids the how-tos of life. How to cook a meal, how to build an engine, how to behave in public, how to do math. Okay, maybe not math. Children are also born without the ability to stop themselves. They do not yet have the internal control of their impulses. That's why God gave them external controls, called parents. We're supposed to set the limits. Here's the line, don't step over it, or this is the consequence you can expect. There's probably half a dozen ways to raise a child. Most of them work, provided that they have one thing in common: consistency. A child needs to know where the line is and that they can expect a consequence for stepping over it. Sooner or later, when they come up to that line, they will pull back on their own reins, perhaps thinking, "I don't think I want to get that consequence today." In this way, they develop impulse control, also known as self-discipline. They also learn the difference between right and wrong according to their family. It's this sense of right or wrong and the ability to control their own impulse that builds character. So I covered a lot about emotional dependency needs just now because they're critically important. There are two types of emotional wounds that children can get. Trauma wounds are from things that people do to us, such as physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Attachment wounds come from things that people did not do for us, such as providing for our childhood dependency needs. These wounds of unmet childhood dependency needs are often referred to as emotional abandonment. Now here I'd like to stress that this is not about blaming parents. Wounded people wound people, and parents cannot give much more than they've been given. However, most parents are on a crusade, it seems, to make sure their kids have it better than they did. They even say such things. This is an expression of love, even if they did not have the wherewithal to meet their dependency needs fully and completely. The original pain of abandonment is an emotional wound. It's like we have an emotional gas tank inside. If we get all of our needs met fully and completely, we feel full, content, happy, satisfied, all those things that we want to feel. To the extent that we don't get those needs met, we feel empty. It may be that we get our needs met half the time, so we feel half full, but something's missing. There's an ache or a longing or a desperate desire for connection. If we barely get them met at all, then we can feel totally empty. I've heard it described as a black hole inside, or a vacuum that sucks the life out of a child. A condition known as failure to thrive has been well documented due to unmet childhood dependency needs. Even worse, a child can have all of their survival needs met and still suffer to the point of death if they don't get their emotional needs met at all. The pain of abandonment is an emotional wound. Like any other wound, it becomes infected. So we can refer to this layer of toxic shame that forms over the top of that emotional wound as an emotional infection. Like any other infection, it spreads throughout the entire system if it goes untreated. The first 6 or 7 years of life, the infection of shame is experienced as a felt sense. A child doesn't yet have the ability to form a narrative about why they feel so ashamed, until they're about 7 or 8. That's when they're full of questions that just seem to pop into their heads. If you've ever been around a 7 or 8-year-old child, you know what I mean. The emotional wound of abandonment and that felt sense of shame causes them to begin to question themselves, their value, their worth, their lovability, and so forth. Unfortunately, when present, the emotional infection of toxic shame develops a voice that we later call the inner critic, and it gives them the answers to those questions. For example, a child that does not get enough quality time with one or more parents develops a sense of not being lovable. One that gets little attention, I'm not worthy. One that gets little affection, I don't measure up. One with little or no guidance can develop a sense of incompetence and a core belief that I can't do anything right. One with little or no discipline may begin to feel that they're not worth the effort because they'll never amount to anything. So as you can see, all of these self-statements become core beliefs. These core beliefs, also known as mental filters, can become deeply ingrained in the young mind of a child. Then they begin to live as if those beliefs are true. Now, just like any other infected wound, a scab begins to form on top. The emotional scab of contempt is all those crusty feelings of anger, bitterness, resentment, and, generally speaking, the life sucks syndrome. That emotional scab of contempt lies just beneath the surface, covering up the emotional infection and emotional wound. All those angry, irritable, and bitter feelings have a lot of energy associated with them. That energy must go somewhere. Children learn to point the contempt inward at self or outward at others. If we internalize the contempt, we tend to have problems with depression, because anger turned inwards is depression. We become all about others and what they want, what they need, what they feel. We're full of shame so that if the sun doesn't come up, somehow I'm to blame. Our behaviors tend to hurt ourselves more than others. We have weak boundaries because we can't say no, you might leave. We cling to people for fear of abandonment and become dependent. We become all about pleasing those people who are important in our lives so they won't leave. That primal fear of abandonment may be so strong that the internalizer may not be able to leave an unhealthy relationship without support and the development of internal resources. Those who tend to externalize their contempt have problems with angry outbursts. They're all about themselves, what they want, what they need, what they feel. There's a shameless and blameless air about them. Nothing's ever their fault, and if all these other stupid people would do things their way, it'd be a much better world. Their behaviors tend to hurt others more than themselves. They have rigid boundaries. You can't get through to them. You can't change their mind or convince them of anything. They profess to be an anti-dependent, saying, I don't need you, I don't need anyone. And they're a bit intrusive and aggressive, meaning that you can say no, but they won't respect your boundary and walk right on through it. So the internalizer tends to be a codependent, the externalizer a counterdependent. It's not really difficult to see how they can find each other, because if I'm all about me and you're all about me, then we're compatible. Typically, people ask me if you can be both an internalizer and an externalizer. Yes, you can. But we tend to live on one side or the other in our primary relationships. Internalizers can only go so far before blowing up, and then they turn it back inward where they beat themselves up for being human. Externalizers can become very childlike and dependent when their partner does work up the strength to leave. Their sense of power evaporates and they become fully aware of their abandonment, shame, and contempt, at least for the time being until they get comfortable again. The emotional wound of abandonment, the infection of shame, and the scab of contempt create that free-floating mass of pain just beneath the surface. That free-floating mass of pain creates in a child a false sense of who they are, a false self. I say false because it's not true. I think I can prove that in a moment. The free-floating mass of emotional pain makes the inner world of the child inhospitable. So they develop an external focus with things like video games or comic books or romance novels, even getting in trouble at school. In general, anything that keeps their focus pointed outward. Things they don't like to do, such as homework, causes the mind to drift inward, which is very uncomfortable and can be a source of academic problems, social problems, and behavioral acting out. The child also reinforces that external focus by putting on a mask or cover-up. I call this an invented self. It becomes the public-facing image that covers up who they feel like they are. The mask or the invented self begins to take shape when their needs are going unmet. For example, in an alcoholic family, the alcoholic gets all wrapped up in their drinking, the codependent gets all wrapped up in the alcoholic. Things progressively gets worse, and then the first child comes along. That child learns in order to get any time, attention, affection, or direction, they'll have to do something outstanding, so they become the family hero. There are two kinds of family heroes. There's the flashy one, who's captain of the football team, or head cheerleader, or class president. This is the kid walking down the street, and everyone thinks he has it made. Little do they know that on the inside he's full of emotional woundedness. He has to get very good at keeping on the mask, otherwise he blows his cover as the hero. That would be devastating. The second kind of family hero becomes the responsible one. This is the child who comes home at 10 or 11 years old, does the dishes, cleans the house, and takes care of the other kids. They're filling in for one of the parents who is all caught up in the problem behavior. Another term for this role is the parentified child. It's a codependent in training. Fixing, rescuing, caretaking all becomes second nature to this child. The codependent in the family reinforces that behavior with positive strokes. Since the first child gets all the positive attention, the second child goes in the other direction, becoming the family rebel or scapegoat. The rebel gets all the negative attention. This child discovers that negative attention is better than no attention at all. They get time, attention, affection from teachers, principals, even juvenile officers, and anyone else who wants to help them overcome their behavioral and emotional difficulties. Someone who wants to be helpful in this case needs to understand the concept of enabling. You can learn more about that behavior in the video of the same name in this collection. So the first child has all the positive attention, the second child all the negative attention. That leaves little or no attention for the third child. In order to get time, attention, and affection, this kid needs to become very creative. This is the lost child. He or she is always around somewhere, playing house or superhero, building a fantasy world, and then going to live in it. They become so lost in their own little world that they don't get much practice interacting with kids in the outer world. They become shy and withdrawn, but very creative. They can also be chameleons. This means they can look like the family hero one moment, the rebel the next moment, the lost child, and then the mascot. By virtue of its position as the baby of the family, the fourth child becomes the family mascot. This is the silly one, or pretty one, or cute one, or the funny one. They're always on stage, and it's their job to bring levity and humor to the family. They frequently become the problem parent's little buddy. The first child is usually the hero because all kids want to be the hero. But if that mask is taken, you have to go with the next best thing, which is the family rebel. Then, of course, the lost child and the mascot. If we have 8 kids and we have 2 sets of these, and when one child leaves home, a vacancy opens up for another child to move into that spot. So it's not character or something they're born with that creates these cover-ups or these masks that they wear. It's the need for time, attention, affection, and direction. Birth order is what usually shapes the cover-ups. Not always, but usually. In our adult lives, we get very good at how we wear those masks. But the invented self is not who I am. The false self is not who I am. So who am I? If you believe in God, then you know He doesn't make junk. He made the true self. In the Bible, God says, I knit you together in your mother's womb. I knew you before I laid the foundations of the earth. It's extremely interesting to me that one of the most well-known promises in the Bible is, I love you and I would never leave nor forsake you, as if he's speaking directly to those of us with abandonment issues. If you don't believe in God, you can at least believe in the innocence of a child. We come into this broken world with our own temperament and potential. Then life happens. Wounded people wound people. And to the extent that a child does not get those dependency needs met, they develop abandonment, shame, and contempt. This is a counterfeit self. They have no way of knowing any different, and so they accept this as who they are, and they create all sorts of core beliefs about why they're not good enough or not lovable. Then they develop this external focus and pour a slab of concrete over the top of all that pain. The mask is all they have, yet there remains that sense of defectiveness rooted in contempt, toxic shame, and the original pain of abandonment. So at this point, the child cannot generate any good feelings on the inside. They cannot even go there. So they have to look to something outside of themselves for comfort and relief. So the tip of the iceberg is where these self-soothing behaviors accumulate. They may start out as grandma saying, here, have a cookie, it'll make you feel better. But we're all wired a little differently, so later on we find something that really does it for us. For one person it may be food, another may prefer alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, working too much, drama, or caretaking needy people. When we discover what really does it for us, we develop an emotional attachment to that object or activity. In other words, we love it. Then we begin to trust it because it does what it's supposed to do every single time we ask. And it just sits there and waits for us to need it. It doesn't scold us, nag us, or tell us what to do. It just does what we want it to do, which is to change how we feel on the inside. The problem with this is that it works very well, at least at first. This becomes a problem because love and trust are the basic ingredients of a primary relationship, a primary emotional bond. We're supposed to have these primary relationships with people, not with objects or activities. So this is an unhealthy relationship with an object or an activity that we engage in order to produce a desired mood swing. That's Craig Nakin's definition of addiction. Eventually, bad things begin to happen. These unhealthy love and trust attachments become so important to us that we may abandon our goals, dreams, self-esteem, money, even our most important family relationships. These consequences add up, and then there's more abandonment, shame, and contempt, which increases the pain as well as the need for comfort and relief, which causes more abandonment, shame, and contempt, and so on. So even if we only had a little bit of emotional woundedness in childhood, if we have the genetics for an addiction, we will begin to accumulate abandonment, shame, and contempt through that avenue in our young adult life. Eventually, we accumulate so much emotional pain that we'll crash and hit bottom. This can be a good thing if we reach out for help at that point. Many people do just that and get into recovery. Others tend to bounce on the bottom because they have a higher threshold for pain, or their dependency is too great, or their self-esteem won't let them believe it's possible for them to recover. Sometimes the dependency is so great because the person carries an extreme amount of trauma or attachment wounds from childhood. They found a solution that helped them medicate that pain just enough to survive. Giving up that solution, no matter what the consequences, can become daunting, if not impossible to them. Sometimes they can manage to stop using while in therapy. As they treat the trauma or attachment wounds, the compulsion to practice their problem behavior can begin to fade away as the healing occurs. It's not often the case to find someone who can heal trauma without stopping their problem behavior. But it's easy to find out if they're able to do that. If they're not able to abstain from addictive behavior on the day of therapy, before, during, or after, then treating addictive behavior first and the trauma second proves to be the best way to go. Whatever the reason, keep in mind that pain is optional. There is a way out. Millions have taken it. Find someone who understands addiction and preferably trauma or attachment wounds and reach out to them. The early phase of recovery with proper treatment looks a bit like this. One must first give up their comfort and relief, which is a hard sell, usually in the midst of the most emotional pain that they've accumulated. Getting in touch with a power greater than themselves is a new source of comfort and relief. However, this can prove difficult for some who have difficulty believing for one reason or another. That's why sometimes inpatient treatment is best, because there's a lot more support and a lot less temptation. In early recovery, it's important to internalize a recovery program, take off the mask, get honest, open, and willing, then do what we've been trying not to do all of our lives. Give up trying to control everything ourselves and turn our focus inward so we can begin the therapy and or 12-step work necessary for the healing of emotional pain. Within usually 2 or 3 years, we enter into middle recovery. We really begin to benefit from our therapy or 12-step work through what John Bradshaw calls the 7 S's of recovery. Socialization means to come out of hiding and connect with other people and build a support network. Self-disclosure means opening up in therapy or with a sponsor. Becoming sensitive to the family system that we came from is important. Changing our self-talk to support recovery. Self-love is doing the work necessary for recovery. Surfacing the pain is important, and growing in spirituality. As we do all of these things, we see that the emotional wound is healing and collapsing in on itself. This leaves room for the true self to begin to emerge. We find out things about ourselves we never knew in recovery. In late recovery, we can see that the emotional wound has been healed. The true self has emerged. We remain honest, open, and willing, practice a recovery program, and stay connected to our higher power for comfort and relief. People reach this level of self-actualization at different times. That's why the recovery focuses on a 24-hour period. I can have several 24 hours in a row, then life happens and it triggers some unfinished business or new opportunities for growth that I didn't know were there, opening up new wounds, but now I have a way to deal with them. This is where we begin to have the ability to live life on life's terms. It's much easier to do when connected with our true self and our higher power. Thanks for watching. Be sure to follow this video up with the video on the life scripts and parts matrix model as soon as possible. Notice how they connect to each other, because the LSPM video is the second of 2 models that lay the foundation for my therapeutic approach, and I will refer back to each of them frequently. Again, thanks for listening. Contact me with any questions or feedback.